Commander Jack Lucky Sterling was having an absolutely fantastic day right up until the aliens showed up. The cargo manifest balanced perfectly. His coffee was exactly the right temperature, and the persistent caffeine addiction was cruising smoothly through the Kuiper Belt with a hold full of mining equipment bound for Pluto base. He should have known it was too good to last. Commander called Navigator Thompson from her station. "I'm picking up some unusual readings. Looks like a massive energy signature about 20,000 kilometers off our port side." "Define unusual," Sterling replied, taking another sip of his perfectly temperatured coffee. "Well, sir, it's either a ship bigger than anything humanity has ever built, or someone left a small star lying around where it definitely shouldn't be." Sterling considered this for a moment. Those both sound like problems that should be someone else's responsibility. Plot a course to give whatever it is a wide berth. "Too late," Sir Thompson said, her voice carrying that special tone reserved for delivering news that was about to ruin someone's day. "They're hailing us." Sterling sighed deeply. "Of course they are. Put them through." The view screen flickered to life, revealing what appeared to be a giant purple space octopus wearing a bow tie and tiny spectacles. It was either an alien or someone had spiked his coffee with something interesting. "Greetings, human vessel," the maybe hallucination announced in perfect English. "I am Senior Testing Administrator Vorax of the Valaxian Evaluation Corps. We've been monitoring your species development and have determined you are ready for your preliminary assessment." Sterling took another long sip of coffee. "Our what now?" "Your preliminary assessment. All emerging spacefaring civilizations must undergo standardized testing before being granted full membership in the galactic community. We're here to evaluate humanity's capabilities through a comprehensive series of examinations." "I see," Sterling said slowly. "And what happens if we decline to participate?" The alien's tentacles wiggled in what might have been amusement. "Oh, participation isn't optional. We'll begin with a simple questionnaire about your species history, followed by practical demonstrations of your problem-solving capabilities, technological understanding, and cultural development. The process typically takes anywhere from 6 to 8 standard solar rotations." 6 to 8? You mean 6 to 8 days? "Oh no, Vorax chuckled. 6 to 8 of your years. Though the current record for completion is only 4 years, held by the ZZX of Proxima Centauri. Delightful species, though they did have an unfair advantage with their hive mind capabilities." Sterling very carefully set down his coffee cup before he could spill it. "Let me get this straight. You're saying that before humanity can join the galactic community, we have to spend potentially 8 years taking tests?" "Precisely. And you're in luck, we have an opening in our testing schedule right now. Your vessel has been selected as humanity's representative sample. We'll begin by measuring your ship's exact dimensions. Please hold position while we deploy our standard measuring apparatus." A massive mechanical arm extended from the Valaxian ship, holding what appeared to be a tape measure large enough to wrap around a small moon. "I should mention," Vorax added cheerfully, "that any attempt to evade testing will result in automatic failure and a mandatory 100-year waiting period before retesting is permitted. Now please state your name and species designation for the record," followed by a brief essay on why you believe humanity is ready for galactic citizenship. Please note that all responses must be in triplicate and notarized by a certified galactic authority. Don't worry, we brought the forms. Sterling stared at the screen for a long moment before reaching for his intercom. "This is Commander Sterling to all hands. Cancel all shore leave for the foreseeable future. And someone please get me Earth on the line, they're going to want to hear this. Also, does anyone know where we keep the aspirin?" As thousands of forms began materializing on his bridge through some sort of alien bureaucratic teleportation system, Sterling could have sworn he saw Vorax's bow tie twitch with satisfaction. Somehow, he had a feeling this was going to be the longest test of his life, literally. "Oh, and one more thing," Vorax added brightly. "All forms must be filled out in purple ink, no exceptions." 3 weeks, 412 forms, and approximately 8,000 cups of coffee later, Sterling found himself sitting across from Dr. Penny Blackwood, Earth's leading xenopsychologist. She'd been brought in after the 3rd time Sterling had submitted test responses in interpretive dance format. "So let me get this straight," Blackwood said, reviewing her notes. "They've had you calculate the exact number of hydrogen atoms in your ship's hull, measure the cognitive development of your crew's houseplants, and demonstrate humanity's artistic achievement through synchronized swimming. Don't forget the mandatory group therapy session for our emergency backup battery," Sterling added. "Apparently they have feelings we need to validate." "Fascinating." Blackwood adjusted her glasses. And you said they seemed particularly interested in your crew's reactions to these tasks. More like disappointed. Administrator Vorax actually looked sad when we successfully composed a musical about the history of space toilet development, in iambic pentameter, with a tap dance number. That's because you weren't supposed to succeed, came a new voice. Ambassador Rex Thompson strode into the room, looking like someone who'd just discovered the meaning of life and found it surprisingly annoying. I've been analyzing the test results from other species. Every single one of them gave up within the first year. Sterling blinked. They what now? The Zexth? The ones with the 4-year record. Thompson pulled up a holographic display. They didn't actually complete the testing. They collectively decided to take a 1,000-year nap rather than continue. The Valaxians counted that as a voluntary withdrawal. But why would an advanced civilization create a testing system designed to make species give up? Blackwood wondered. Their discussion was interrupted by Vorax materializing in the room through what appeared to be a portal made entirely of paperwork. Excellent news, the alien announced. We've processed your first round of submissions and found 7,423 minor errors requiring complete resubmission of all documentation. Also, we've developed an exciting new testing module, calculating the emotional impact of solar wind on cometary debris. Isn't that wonderful? Sterling looked at the mountain of forms, then at Blackwood and Thompson, then back at the cheerfully wiggling alien. Something clicked in his mind. Dr. Blackwood, he said slowly, what's the one thing humans are historically terrible at? Giving up when we really should, she replied immediately. And what's the one thing we're exceptionally good at? Finding increasingly creative ways to be stubborn out of pure spite. Sterling smiled. It wasn't a particularly nice smile. Ambassador Thompson, how would you feel about helping me organize a galaxy-wide lesson in malicious compliance? Thompson's answering grin could have powered a small star. Commander, I thought you'd never ask. Oh, Vorax added brightly, apparently oblivious to the growing conspiracy. I almost forgot all resubmissions must now be completed while standing on one leg and humming your species' most popular commercial jingles. In reverse. Underwater. As Vorax began distributing even more forms, Sterling turned to his companions. Did you know, he said conversationally, that Engineer Rodriguez has been working on a way to automate interpretive dance? How fascinating, Blackwood replied, catching on quickly. And I've been developing a theoretical framework for expressing mathematical concepts through contemporary finger painting. What a coincidence, Thompson added. I just finished drafting a proposal for translating legal documents into synchronized whale song. For the first time since testing began, Sterling saw Vorax's bow tie droop slightly. The game, as they said in ancient Earth literature, was afoot. And humanity was about to demonstrate exactly why testing their patience was possibly the worst mistake an advanced alien civilization could make. Now then, Vorax said, tentacles waving excitedly, who's ready to begin calculating the philosophical implications of vacuum decay on bureaucratic efficiency? Sterling raised his hand. Quick question, would you prefer those calculations in interpretive dance, or should we stick to our new standardized format of Baroque opera? Somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of the galactic community, a warning bell began to ring. 2 months into what was now being called the Great Testing, humanity had developed a new art form, weaponized compliance. The forms clearly state. Ambassador Thompson was explaining to an increasingly distressed Vorax that all submissions must be completed in purple ink. They do not, however, specify which purple. Therefore, we have compiled our responses in every known shade of purple. From midnight aubergine to slightly less midnight aubergine to Kevin from accounting's favorite aubergine. That's that Vorax's tentacles were practically tied in knots. The intent was clearly. Oh, intent, Dr. Blackwood chimed in cheerfully. That's fascinating, you should mention that. We've prepared a 47,000-page analysis of the philosophical implications of bureaucratic intent versus literal interpretation. In interpretive dance format, naturally. The backup dancers will be here Tuesday. Sterling watched the exchange from his captain's chair, sipping what was either his 5th or 500th cup of coffee. He'd lost count somewhere around the time they'd submitted their response to the Calculate the Impact of Stellar Evolution on Administrative Efficiency test in the form of a rock opera featuring a choir of method actors pretending to be photons. This isn't how this is supposed to work, Vorax muttered, adjusting his bow tie nervously. The other species all just gave up. Chief Engineer Maya Chaos Rodriguez emerged from behind a tower of forms, her hands covered in what appeared to be glitter glue. Why would we give up? This is the most fun I've had since we had to prove the existence of dark matter through interpretive needlepoint. Fun, all 7 of Vorax's eyes blinked simultaneously. You're finding this fun? Of course, Rodriguez grinned. By the way, I've finished automating our synchronized swimming responses. The robotic dolphins should be arriving any minute now. You can't use robotic dolphins, Vorax protested. That's actually. Thompson cut in, producing a stack of papers that somehow materialized from thin air they'd been learning from the Valaxians, according to subsection 7, paragraph 23, line 456 of the testing protocols. Artificial assistance is permitted as long as it can demonstrate emotional growth through interpretive art. Our dolphins have been taking poetry classes. Poetry classes. Oh yes, they're particularly fond of haiku. Would you like to hear their dissertation on the emotional resonance of spacecraft maintenance schedules? It's quite moving. Literally, we had to install wheels on the presentation platform. Vorax's bow tie was now rotating slowly counterclockwise, which Sterling had learned was a sign of extreme distress. This requires consultation with the Central Testing Authority, the alien announced, vanishing in a puff of bureaucratic probability. How long do you think before they realize we've already submitted appeals to the Central Testing Authority? Sterling asked once Vorax was gone. In triplicate. Using only words that start with the letter P. Performed by a mariachi band. Given their processing speed, Thompson consulted his watch. About the same time they discover we've already filed for 17 different types of testing extensions, including one that technically doesn't exist yet because we filed it in Future Purple ink. Future Purple isn't a thing, Blackwood pointed out. It is now. I had Rodriguez build a temporal chromatic oscillator last week. It only works on Thursdays and requires being serenaded by kazoo music, but according to paragraph 89 subsection C of the temporal regulations. Which we wrote, Rodriguez added proudly. Which we wrote. That makes it officially valid for all testing purposes. Sterling was about to respond when Vorax reappeared, now wearing what appeared to be 7 different bow ties, each in a different shade of bureaucratic panic. New testing protocols have been implemented, the alien announced triumphantly. All submissions must now be completed in non-purple ink. And no more interpretive dance. Excellent, Thompson beamed. We anticipated this and have already prepared our next round of submissions in a color we've invented called anti-purple. It only exists when you're not looking directly at it, and must be interpreted through the medium of progressive jazz. One of Vorax's bow ties spontaneously untied itself. We've also, Rodriguez added, developed a new art form we're calling pre-interpretive dance, which technically occurs before the actual dance and therefore doesn't count as interpretive dance at all. The temporal physics are quite fascinating. Would you like to see our presentation on the quantum mechanics of bureaucratic loopholes? The string quartet of theoretical particles will be performing it next week, or possibly last month. Sterling watched as Vorax's remaining bow ties began to vibrate at frequencies previously unknown to physics. Humanity might not have faster than light travel yet, but they had apparently mastered faster than light frustration. Now then, Sterling said, raising his coffee cup in a toast, shall we discuss our proposal for expressing mathematical proofs through synchronized yodeling? We've found it pairs particularly well with our new thesis on the aerodynamic properties of administrative red tape. The sound of Vorax's bow ties achieving quantum uncertainty was almost musical, almost. 6 months into testing, humanity had elevated bureaucratic warfare to an art form. Literally. The Louvre now had an entire wing dedicated to administrative abstract expressionism. The fascinating thing, Dr. Blackwood was explaining to a panel of increasingly concerned Valaxian administrators, is how humanity's response to your testing protocols has evolved into its own distinct cultural movement. We're calling it malicious creativity. Sterling watched from his now permanent position in the testing center as Rodriguez demonstrated their latest innovation, a quantum computer that could only solve equations while performing Swan Lake. As you can see, Rodriguez continued, gesturing to the pirouetting processor, we found that combining unnecessary complexity with aggressive enthusiasm produces results that are technically perfect while being fundamentally infuriating. That's not. You can't. Administrator Vorax, now sporting a bow tie that appeared to be trying to escape into another dimension, waved his tentacles in exasperation. The purpose of these tests is to measure your species' patience. The room went quiet. Even the quantum computer paused mid-pirouette. I'm sorry, Sterling said. setting down his coffee cup with deliberate care. Did you just say these tests are measuring our patience? Of course, Vorax exclaimed. How else would we determine if a species is too stubborn to be safely integrated into galactic society? All other civilizations gave up within months. But you humans, you just keep. Getting more creative, Thompson suggested. More enthusiastic, Rodriguez offered. More insufferably thorough, Blackwood added helpfully. Yes, all of Vorax's bow ties simultaneously achieved quantum superposition. You were supposed to get frustrated and quit. Instead, you've turned the entire testing process into some sort of performance art, Sterling suggested. Speaking of which, has anyone showed you our latest submission? It's a philosophical treatise on the nature of bureaucratic existence, performed entirely through the medium of synchronized coffee drinking. We've got the entire crew participating. We call it Caffeine Dreams in B minor. The B stands for bureaucracy, Rodriguez clarified. Also, we've taught the quantum computer to tap dance. It only works in zero gravity, but according to the regulations we wrote last week. You can't write regulations, Vorax protested. Actually, Thompson interjected, producing yet another stack of papers from what appeared to be a pocket dimension of pure paperwork. According to subparagraph 94Q of the emergency testing protocols which we submitted during last Tuesday's interpretive quantum physics demonstration test, subjects are permitted to submit regulatory addendums as long as they're composed in at least 3 different art forms simultaneously. We chose Baroque opera, abstract expressionist painting, and competitive yarn bombing, Blackwood added. The lobby installation should be complete by next week. We're calling it Red Tape Dreams in Wool Major. Sterling watched as Vorax's bow ties began to vibrate at frequencies that threatened to tear the fabric of spacetime. You know, he said conversationally, we've been sharing our testing strategies with all human colonies. Rodriguez here has developed a particularly interesting method of translating bureaucratic procedures into interpretive breakdancing. Sharing strategies. Vorax's voice had risen to a pitch previously achievable only by quantum particles in extreme distress. Oh yes, Thompson smiled. We've established a pan-human network for the exchange of creative compliance techniques. We're calling it Bureaucrats Without Borders. Would you like to see our presentation on the quantum entanglement of administrative procedures? The interpretive juggling team is ready whenever you are. Although, Rodriguez added, they can only perform while reciting prime numbers in reverse alphabetical order. It's a union thing. Vorax's bow ties had now achieved a state of bureaucratic panic so profound that they were technically qualifying as a new form of matter. Now then, Sterling said, reaching for his coffee cup, about our proposal for expressing statistical analysis through competitive kazoo orchestration. The sound of Vorax's bow ties attempting to file for dimensional asylum was almost as sweet as perfectly temperatured coffee. Almost. 1 year into what was now being called the Great Human Compliance Campaign, the Valaxian testing system was experiencing what could only be described as an existential crisis. The humans have done what First Administrator K. Vax demanded. All 12 of his bow ties spinning like ancient Earth helicopter blades. They've systematized non-compliance. Vorax reported miserably. They're running training seminars. There are certificates. In 19 different shades of purple. An anti-purple, added Second Administrator P. Lax. Don't forget the anti-purple. How could I forget the anti-purple? Vorax's tentacles twisted in bureaucratic agony. They've written a 12,000-page dissertation on its theoretical properties, performed entirely through interpretive mime, with footnotes and tap dance. On the viewing screen behind them, footage played of humanity's latest testing response. Commander Sterling stood at the center of what appeared to be a combination orchestra pit and physics lab, conducting a symphony of quantum computers performing what the humans had dubbed Schrödinger's paperwork, a ballet in 5 dimensions. The worst part, Vorax continued, is that other species are starting to take notes. What do you mean? Taking notes? Kvax's bow ties achieved synchronous rotation, a sign of extreme alarm. The Zazex have woken up from their 1,000-year nap to watch the humans' techniques. The Proxians have started a study group. Even the mechanoids of Tau Ceti have begun incorporating interpretive dance into their processing algorithms. Surely it can't be that bad, P. Lax offered weakly. Yesterday, Vorax said, I received a formal complaint about our complaint submission process. It was filed by a coalition of 17 different species, in the form of a rock opera, with a kazoo section. On the screen, Sterling's quantum orchestra reached a crescendo as Rodriguez's team of robot dolphins performed what appeared to be a zero-gravity representation of the complete history of bureaucratic procedure through the medium of synchronized swimming. Did you know? Thompson's voice carried over the footage that according to the regulations we submitted last month, all testing responses can now be submitted in the form of recursive performance art. We're calling this piece the infinite loop of administrative possibility. It's a performance about preparing for a performance about preparing for a performance. Make it stop, K-Vax whispered, his bow ties now vibrating at frequencies that threatened to achieve sentience. We can't, Vorax replied. They filed for 17 different types of performance continuation permits, in triplicate, using time-displaced ink that technically hasn't been invented yet. How is that even possible? According to their documentation, which was submitted through the medium of quantum origami, the ink exists in a state of bureaucratic probability until it's directly observed, at which point it retroactively becomes valid due to a loophole they discovered in the temporal regulations. The temporal regulations, they wrote. No, the ones they're going to write next Tuesday. Or possibly last century. Their paperwork has achieved non-linear causality. On the screen, Dr. Blackwood could be seen presenting what appeared to be a theoretical framework for expressing administrative procedures through interpretive juggling. The fascinating thing about human bureaucratic evolution, her voice carried over the chaos, is our ability to transform tedium into entertainment. For example, this next piece explores the quantum superposition of filing systems through the medium of synchronized coffee drinking. They're enjoying this, K-Vax realized with growing horror. They're actually enjoying this. It gets worse, Vorax added. They've started a galactic newsletter. They're calling it The Compliant Nonconformist. It's published in every known language, plus 3 they invented specifically for expressing bureaucratic concepts through interpretive dance. And the latest issue, P-Lax added, includes a beginner's guide to quantum administrative theory, with pop-up diagrams. As they watched, Sterling's quantum orchestra launched into what appeared to be a physicist's interpretation of flight of the bureaucrats performed entirely on instruments that existed in a state of quantum uncertainty. Should we, K-Vax's bow ties had achieved a state of panic previously thought theoretically impossible? Should we consider the possibility that we may have made a terrible mistake? The sound of humanity's latest submission, a choral arrangement of the complete testing regulations performed by a choir of AI constructs who only achieved consciousness while filling out forms, echoed through the chamber. I believe, Vorax said quietly. That mistake achieved quantum certainty approximately 6 months ago, right around the time they taught their coffee machines to file appeals in iambic pentameter. 18 months after the testing began, Commander Jack Lucky Sterling sat in his ready room aboard the persistent caffeine addiction, sipping a perfectly temperatured cup of coffee and watching the Valaxian High Council squirm. After careful consideration, First Administrator K-Vax announced, his collection of bow ties now permanently fixed in a state of quantum uncertainty, we have decided to. Yes, Sterling prompted helpfully. Would you like us to submit this response in interpretive dance format? We have the quantum ballet standing by. No, all 12 administrators shouted simultaneously. I mean, that won't be necessary. We are hereby announcing that humanity has passed the testing protocols. There was a moment of silence, broken only by the distant sound of Rodriguez's robot dolphins practicing their quantum physics chorale. As Sterling raised an eyebrow. But we haven't completed all the tests. We still have 6 years and 4 months of synchronized swimming demonstrations scheduled. You passed, K-Vax explained, by failing to fail. The testing protocol wasn't designed to measure your capabilities, it was designed to measure your response to intentionally impossible situations. You see, Vorax added, his bow tie now seemingly trapped in a time loop. The galaxy is full of potentially hostile civilizations. We needed a way to identify species that were too stubborn to be safely conquered. And we succeeded by being incredibly annoying, Dr. Blackwood asked from her position next to a quantum computer that was currently composing a symphony about its own existence. You succeeded, K-Vax corrected, by being unstoppably, unrelentingly, and unfathomably enthusiastic about being annoying. No conquering species would ever consider it worth the effort to subjugate a civilization capable of turning bureaucratic compliance into an art form. Also, P-Lax added, you've somehow managed to inspire a galaxy-wide renaissance in administrative creativity. We're still getting interpretive dance submissions from the mechanoids of Tau Ceti. So what happens now? Thompson asked, somehow producing a stack of forms from a dimension that appeared to consist entirely of paperwork. Now Kavax said with what might have been a smile or possibly a bureaucratic grimace, "You're being promoted. Humanity is hereby appointed as the new administrators of the galactic testing protocol." Sterling's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. "We're what now? Who better to test new species than the civilization that turned bureaucratic warfare into performance art? Besides," Vorax added, "we're still trying to process your last submission. The one about quantum superposition of administrative probability performed by time-displaced coffee machines." "Ah yes," Rodriguez grinned. "The Schrödinger's cappuccino scenario, the temporal physics department is particularly proud of that one." "So," Sterling said slowly, "you're telling me that humanity not only passed your impossible test but is now in charge of administering it to others?" Precisely. Kavax's bow ties achieved what appeared to be a state of resigned acceptance. "The galaxy is yours to terrorize, test as you see fit." Sterling looked at his crew. Thompson was already drafting new testing protocols that seemed to involve quantum yodeling. Rodriguez's dolphins had started a barbershop quartet specialized in singing about administrative procedures. And Blackwood was sketching plans for what appeared to be a ballet about the heat death of bureaucracy. "Well then," Sterling said, raising his coffee cup in a toast, "I believe we have work to do. Dr. Blackwood, how do you feel about adding mandatory coffee appreciation classes to the testing protocol?" "Only if we can express the results through quantum interpretive juggling," she replied seriously. "Ambassador Thompson, thoughts on requiring all future submissions in colors that only exist in theoretical physics?" Already drafted the paperwork. "In triplicate, using ink that can only be read by quantum computers performing Swan Lake." Engineer Rodriguez. "The time-displaced robot dolphins are ready for their first performance of bureaucratic rhapsody in zero gravity. Also, I've taught the coffee machines to file appeals in Klingon." Sterling turned back to the increasingly concerned-looking Valaxian council. "I believe," he said with a smile that suggested the galaxy was about to learn entirely new definitions of bureaucratic creativity, "that humanity accepts this promotion. Now, who would like to see our presentation on the quantum mechanics of administrative probability? The interpretive kazoo orchestra is ready when you are." The sound of an entire galactic council's bow ties achieving simultaneous existential crisis was, Sterling had to admit, almost as satisfying as perfectly temperatured coffee. Almost. Until humanity files for a recursive temporal extension of the ending, performed through the medium of quantum synchronized swimming.